some of the oldest human history is found in modern-day Turkey. Evidence of ancient people has been found here in many forms, from 27,000-year-old footprints to the remains of what might have been the world's first cities. Early civilizations emerged in Anatolia, part of modern Turkey. Throughout ancient history, great wars were fought there over resources, religion, and territory. One of the most intriguing archaeological sites Turkey offers is Çatalhöyük, a mound in the country's Konya province. Human activity over many thousands of years created this mound. For over 1,000 years, this settlement bustled with life. It was perhaps the earliest large concentrated settlement verging on a city in human history. This account will explore the history behind this spectacular World Heritage Site, from its early beginnings to its ultimate abandonment. Let's journey through time to discover Çatalhöyük, one of the world's earliest known large proto-urban settlements. Çatalhöyük first came to the attention of modern researchers in 1958, when James Mellart, a famed English archaeologist and author, excavated the region with his team. This was the first of what would become several expeditions to the region over the course of the next few years. On his first visit, Mellart was amazed to discover more than 150 individual rooms and buildings within the mound, which sat on the plains of southern Turkey. Remarkably, many of these rooms' walls were decorated. Elaborate murals and paintings adorned them, often depicting human figures, animals, and geometric patterns. Its significance was noted immediately. Plans were made to return to the area to learn more. Between 1961 and 1965, James Mellart returned with his team periodically to further excavate what was clearly a sprawling ancient settlement. Astonishingly, a further 18 layers of buildings were discovered over the course of these visits. This revealed just how important and long-lived this settlement was while it was inhabited. It was revealed that during the time Çatalhöyük was occupied by the ancient peoples of Anatolia, it was built upon again and again, growing higher and higher with each new layer of construction. The deeper Mellart's team dug, the older the artifacts they uncovered became. Those at the surface level dated from around 5600 BC, while the ones at the bottom dated back to an incredible 7100 BC. While these expeditions were ongoing, trouble was brewing. Mellart became involved with the Dorak affair, a scandal concerning archaeological artifacts from the ancient Turkish Yortan culture, which had allegedly gone missing or were illicitly handled. The Turkish media began to accuse Mellart of involvement in the smuggling of these artifacts with intent to sell them in Western Europe, reportedly having identified him near the location where they were supposedly found or offered for sale. While the specifics of the case remain complex and debated to this day, Mellart was subsequently banned from excavating in Turkey, including at Çatalhöyük, as a result of the controversy. He was later permitted to return to Turkey for a time, but regarding Çatalhöyük not as a director of excavations. Work on the site mostly stopped for several decades following the Dorak affair and Mellart's departure. Ian Hodder, an archaeologist then working with the University of Cambridge in England, would be the next to officially lead major work on Çatalhöyük, beginning in 1993. He developed his influential theories of post-processual archaeology partly through this work. Currently, the site is being excavated by a team which has included leadership from individuals like Ali Umut Türkcan from Turkey's Anadolu University. Çatalhöyük was first constructed and settled in the Neolithic era, or New Stone Age, a time before the advent of metalworking technologies and recorded history. Up to 8,000 people are believed to have inhabited the settlement at its peak. which would have resembled a large town or a small city by modern population density standards for such settlements. When it was first settled, the early inhabitants near Çatalhöyük were likely nomadic or semi-nomadic hunter-gatherers, like many people elsewhere in the world at that time. These people would have lived on the plains of Anatolia, hunting wild animals and gathering plants for generations, before finally settling down more permanently at a site that provided an abundance of resources and food types. Over the course of Çatalhöyük's long occupation, its citizens slowly began to develop new technologies and intensify existing ones. Knowledge about wild plants soon led these people to domesticate crops. This in turn eventually contributed to or coincided with the domestication of wild goats, sheep, and possibly pigs, which could reliably produce a steady stream of food. Çatalhöyük did not work like a modern town or city, in the sense that there were no roads or even formal pathways between houses at ground level. Its inhabitants would instead walk on the compacted rooftops of their dwellings. They entered and exited their homes via holes in the roof, climbing down a ladder to reach their living areas. While they would spend much of their private time inside their buildings, much of the daily activity in the settlement happened on these rooftops. Communal facilities, ovens, areas for stockpiles, and workshops were often situated atop the flat roofs of these dwellings. It was here that technologies were developed, ideas were likely passed around, and some communal activities or rituals took place. There appears to be no clear evidence of a strong class-based system or hierarchical political structure evident in the burials and buildings found at Çatalhöyük, especially in its earlier phases. This was a community that appeared to work together closely, sharing responsibility across the settlement to ensure the wider success and sustenance of the populace. The remains of some of Çatalhöyük's people have been discovered at the site, telling us a great deal about who they were and how they lived. When somebody living in the settlement died, they were often buried underneath the floors of the houses, sometimes in a flexed position. If the deceased was a child, they were typically buried with care, sometimes with items like jewelry, and occasionally painted with ochre. This reverence for deceased children might suggest Çatalhöyük's society became more tied to their settled land. They likely valued fertility, and the children who would grow up to support the settlement in high regard. It would not have been as easy for a large established town such as Çatalhöyük to simply pack up and return to a fully nomadic lifestyle if something went wrong, and the local population could no longer be supported by available resources. In several instances, the skulls of the deceased were removed from their skeletons after burial and initial decomposition. These were sometimes decorated with plaster and markings and stored within the house. This sounds morbid to modern sensibilities. However, it was perhaps an ancient way of preserving the memory and honoring the lives of their lost loved ones, keeping ancestors part of the household. It might be thought of in a similar way to how some cultures keep portraits or mementos of those they have lost. If Çatalhöyük is known for one thing above all else, it is its art. This early settlement, throughout its time being studied by archaeologists, has produced enough art to fascinate an enthusiast for a lifetime. Not only is much of it intriguing and intricate, but many of these artifacts allow us modern humans to peek into the lifestyles, beliefs, and symbolism of those who created them. Some of the most common pieces of art discovered from the settlement are figurines made of fired clay. Typically, these show early representations of humans and animals. They have been found in various contexts, such as within the walls of houses near communal ovens, in what appear to be shrine-like abandoned structures, and in pits. One of the most famous figures, the seated woman of Çatalhöyük, shows the headless body of a large woman seated possibly on a throne, flanked by a pair of felines, perhaps leopards. It is thought to have been sculpted around 6000 BC. The original was found headless, but the head has since been restored based on similar figures. It follows a trend seen in many prehistoric sculptures, which tend to depict the nude bodies of large or steatopygus women. These Venus figurines, as they are broadly called, are theorized to represent a mother goddess fertility symbols or figures of authority, but may alternatively be simple portraits or representations of revered ancestors. The inhabitants of Çatalhöyük also had a strong tradition of wall painting. Paintings are abundant across the ruins of Çatalhöyük and were amongst the first features of the site that drew James Mellart to excavate it in the first place. On the interior and sometimes exterior plaster of Çatalhöyük's houses, paintings adorn many of the walls. These show everything from simple geometric zigzag patterns to elaborate reconstructions of people, animals, and perhaps even landscapes or events. Paintings of ancient Anatolian hunters chasing wild bulls lined the walls of homes, perhaps denoting successful hunts, commemorating important events, or holding ritual significance for those who lived within. Some animals shown in these paintings are either locally extinct or entirely extinct today. Some images depict leopards, which are only ever spotted in Turkey on extremely rare occasions today, while others show aurochs, an extinct species of large wild cattle. Some images are slightly more unsettling to modern eyes. One building was shown to have been painted with images of vultures seemingly interacting with headless human figures. This was likely an artist's impression of death rituals and the beliefs surrounding the treatment of the dead. Animals were incredibly important to the ancient inhabitants of Çatalhöyük, and many homes featured animal remains, particularly horns and skulls, mounted on their walls as bucrania. These often consisted of plastered skulls, once belonging to wild bulls, installed in prominent positions within living quarters. These were often painted sometimes red with ochre, and may have had deep religious or symbolic significance. Sometime around the 6th millennium BC, Çatalhöyük was gradually abandoned. Its people left the region over time, perhaps opting to settle elsewhere in smaller communities, and everything that had been constructed, created, and buried there remained where it was left to face the test of time. What could have caused this when it was seemingly going so well for the ancient people of this incredible settlement? Climate change and environmental shifts are thought to have played a major part. Towards the end of Çatalhöyük's occupation, there seems to have been a significant environmental shift in the region. The area surrounding the settlement changed from being a wetter, perhaps seasonally flooded marshland environment to a much drier one. Initially, this drying might have increased the amount of arable land available to Çatalhöyük's inhabitants, allowing them to expand their crops without the constant risk that flooding would destroy the harvest. This environmental change likely altered things for the community. With more reliance on domesticated produce available through farming, the citizens of Çatalhöyük may have begun to rely less upon communal hunting and a purely shared foraging economy for survival. Communal hunts and large community celebrations, which are thought to have reinforced social cohesion, may have become less frequent or changed in nature, which in turn could have led to societal problems or shifts in social structure. Before the later phases of Çatalhöyük and its increased reliance on agriculture, there was little evidence of a rigid hierarchy or significant wealth-based inequality in burials or housing. The only power, so to speak, in earlier times may have been held by those who had positions of religious importance or those who were skilled at organizing community gatherings, hunts, and feasts. With the decline of absolute community reliance for basic subsistence and the potential for agricultural surplus, some argue that certain groups or households in Çatalhöyük began to accumulate food and wealth, possibly holding it above those who had comparatively little. These more prosperous households, in turn, may have begun to gain access to or build better homes, which were perhaps larger or constructed with more exotic or valuable materials, signaling emerging social differentiation. This could have led to unrest or a gradual dispersal within the large settlement. With the developing potential for hierarchical social structures, some citizens of Çatalhöyük may have begun to leave, splitting off into smaller individual villages in the surrounding plains, away from those who might seek to impose limits or control over their lives. By around 5600 to 5500 BC, the site was largely abandoned. While Çatalhöyük may not be a functioning settlement today, much can be learned about ancient life from the multitude of fascinating artifacts found there. Çatalhöyük has provided us with incredible insights into the art, architecture, and daily life of one of the world's earliest large settled communities. Perhaps, however, there are also broader lessons to be learned for the future from studying this ancient settlement. Some interpretations suggest that increasing social differentiation or inequality might have contributed to the eventual dispersal of this society, a theme that resonates with challenges in the world today. The story of Çatalhöyük offers a point of reflection on societal dynamics, sustainability, and change then and now. Like this video. Share it with those who still wonder what came before. And subscribe to Before Us, where the shadows of the past still shape who we are.